There's a brand new book out this week, and all of Washington, D.C. is buzzing about it. It is the first and already the definitive book on Joe Biden's horrific pullout of the Afghan war. The book, here's the cover, it's called Kabul, the untold story of Biden's fiasco and the American warriors who fought to the end. The authors join us now, investigative journalists Jerry Dunleavy and James Hasson. Thanks for joining us. Congratulations on the book, guys.
Hey, thank you very much, Larry.
Thanks, Larry.
I want to, now don't take this the wrong way, because I know you guys, I know you're great journalists, you're great investigative journalists, but I'm a little surprised that you're the only guys who have cared about this story. I mean, this town, you can't walk 2 blocks without tripping over journalists. And this is a great story. It has to do with the military, the end of a prolonged war that everyone was writing about for 2 decades. And it involves government incompetence. I mean, this is the kind of thing Bob Woodward would have written about a couple of decades ago. Why do you think it's just you two who did this?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, look. I can't speak to the rest of the media, but obviously, you know, the media was covering this quite a bit in about August 2021, but man, the media stopped pretty quick, didn't they? And
yeah.
Bigger thing here is that the Biden administration has been stonewalling and slow walking on this from the moment that it began. You know, I'm actually very recently, I joined the House Foreign Affairs Committee as an investigator to help lead their investigation into this Afghanistan withdrawal debacle. And I'm just here like in my personal capacity.
Totally understand. Well,
but you know,
I think you're being generous to your colleagues, though. Let's be real here. If this had happened under President George W. Bush or President Donald Trump, I think there would have been more attention paid by journalists.
I think absolutely. This was Joe Biden top to finish, and it was a complete and total disaster. This damaged his approval rating, I think, pretty much permanently. And it's a dangerous and politically damaging topic for him, rightly so. And so, yeah, I mean, it makes sense that a lot of the media doesn't want to talk about it. It obviously makes sense that congressional Democrats don't want to investigate it. And it makes sense that President Biden is and his administration are stonewalling.
Well, and I appreciate that. And by the way, Jerry, to that point, and I appreciate you pointing out that you now have a job in a government capacity, although that's not the guise under which you appear today. James, I do appreciate the tone of this book, despite the subheading that does say Biden's fiasco. This is not a political diatribe. This is not a political attack. This is a true telling of what happened. James, I think the political aspects of it just sort of speaks for itself.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And thank you for saying that, Larry. When we wrote Kabul, we decided from the outset that we were going to tell all of the facts and let them speak for themselves and let the chips fall where they may. And we've criticized decisions that were made by members of the Trump administration. To some degree, we thought that the Doha agreement was imperfect, but at the end of the day, this was Joe Biden's administration. The way it happened was his call. His political appointees were the ones who completely screwed up the evacuation of Americans and allies, and he's the commander-in-chief, and the buck stops there. And
yeah, as well it should. And by the way, if I remember right, that was deliberate. You know, Trump did have, as he was leaving office, they did have an outline of a plan that certainly needed to be finalized. But if I remember right, Jerry, and I believe you detailed this in the book, the Biden administration came in, sort of made it their own. They deliberately made it their own. They changed some dates, and he gave a now infamous press conference saying, this is what we're doing, and it's not the Trump plan, it's the Biden plan.
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind, you know, the Biden administration, really their only defense on all of this is they want to try and point to the Trump administration's Doha agreement, right? But the problem with trying to blame it on that is that there's a few problems with that. One is that President Biden said himself, I would have done this even if there was no Doha agreement. So throw that out the window. It's not a good example. On top of that, the Doha agreement flawed. We don't pretend that it wasn't flawed. But there were conditions in that agreement that the Taliban had to follow, including making sure that al-Qaeda was not threatening the United States or the West. The Taliban never followed through on any of the commitments, especially including that one. Their alliance with the Taliban remains strong to this day. And Biden, to try to get around that, misled about al-Qaeda somehow being gone from Afghanistan and this sort of thing. Totally untrue. Al-Qaeda's alliance with the Taliban and vice versa remains strong. And al-Qaeda is there today. There are training camps there today. The Taliban is funding al-Qaeda. And some of the members of the Taliban government are even considered to be members of al-Qaeda themselves. Huh. And so, these excuses that the Biden administration has, they don't hold water. On top of that, Biden retained Zalmay Khalilzad, who was the main negotiator for the Doha Agreement. He kept him on, and Blinken praised the vital work that he was doing. And so the Biden administration embraced this. This was theirs. This was their plan, or lack thereof, I would say.
James, today is August 16th. Today is the 2-year anniversary of those unbelievably dramatic images of Air Force jets leaving Hamid Karzai Airport with Afghanis clinging to the side of the plane and then falling to their death. And one thing that you address here that I think still hasn't been completely fleshed out in a congressional hearing is, why did they evacuate from Karzai Airport? Every single military veteran of the Afghan war that I've talked to said that was the original sin of this whole thing. Bagram, Bagram, Bagram. We built Bagram. We had it secure. The entire evacuation should have been done there instead of in the chaos that was Hamid Karzai Airport. Tell me about your investigations here and your reporting and what it revealed about that key decision.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, that was the original sin of this whole fiasco, was abandoning Bagram. Bagram is eminently defensible. It had plenty of runways. It's built for the type of large-scale operations that would be needed for this kind of evacuation. And it would have allowed us to continue kind of holding the Taliban at bay, at least in that radius around Kabul and Bagram, where we could conduct an orderly exit. What I can tell you is Bagram is large. It takes a few thousand soldiers to be able to man effectively and to properly defend. And Joe Biden did not want to leave a few thousand troops. He wanted a number under 1,000. And if your number is under 1,000, then you have to close Bagram.
Hold on, let me pause you there. So if this had all been done through Bagram, it would have required several thousand members of the military, but it would have been more secure. And you're telling me that President Biden, for political purposes, they wanted a talking point. They wanted to be able to say that we have less than 1,000 military members there. That was the entire consideration, was a talking point.
That was entirely the consideration, yes. And the military leaders, to their credit, the generals, pushed back on that strenuously. And the Biden administration waffled slightly about whether or not they were going to keep it open, to the extent that we talked to a non-commissioned officer who was stationed in Kabul, actually, and he was in charge of all the sensitive communications equipment, and he went to go install some of that equipment at Bagram so they could prepare for operations out of there. And then the word came down that no, it was being closed and shut down, and he had to go back a few days later and rip it all out. But this was a political decision, and it was deadly.
I'm glad that the brass at the Pentagon pushed back, but I mean, there have been times in our history where it would be more than pushback. There would be resignations tendered to protect the lives of our service members. And by the way, I appreciate the fact that you got that information from a non-commissioned officer. Obviously, you guys know what you're doing. You talk to the NCOs, not the actual officers. All right, stick with us, because when we come back, we're going to talk about probably some of the best reporting in this entire book, and that's saying something, and certainly the most thoroughly researched. The events of August 26th, the deadly day where we lost, needlessly, 13 members of our military. We continue on this very important discussion of this blockbuster book in just a moment. It's O'Connor Tonight.